He thought he had finally caught a break. For years, 33-year-old Marcus Green had driven inner-city buses up and down the Midwest, long hours behind the wheel, staying in cheap motels, bringing home just enough to scrape by. His duplex on Detroit's east side was modest. His bills were always overdue, and every month it seemed like he was falling further behind. Still, he dreamed of something better, a home of his own, a future with more stability, and fewer nights spent away from the woman he trusted most in the world, his wife Angela. What Marcus didn't know was that the woman who once smiled at him from across the kitchen table had already begun imagining a life that no longer included him. Angela Green was 32, attractive, polished, and by all appearances hardworking. She supervised the front desk at a fashionable women's boutique in Dearborn, managing clerks and soothing demanding customers. She liked the appearance of success, but beneath the surface her finances were a mess. The couple's credit cards were maxed, car payments were overdue, and utilities stacked up like constant reminders of what they couldn't afford. To Marcus, the debt was just another burden to push through. To Angela, it felt like a trap. And in that trap, she found a way out, an affair with Victor Hall, a mall security guard with broad shoulders, a cocky grin, and no sense of responsibility. The affair had been going on for months by the summer of 2018. Marcus thought Angela's late nights at work were just part of her unpredictable schedule, but those nights were often spent in Victor's one-bedroom apartment. He had no idea that while he was clocking overtime miles on the bus, she was whispering about running away, about starting fresh, about cutting ties to the life they'd built together. For Victor, the relationship was a way to feel important, to escape his own debts. For Angela, it was fuel for fantasies she never spoke of at home. Then came August 10th, 2018. Marcus pulled into a gas station on one of his usual routes and, like he did every week, bought a handful of Powerball tickets. He had played for years without much thought, never expecting more than a few dollars in return. That night, in a motel room in Saginaw, Marcus sat on the bed and checked the numbers. One by one, they matched. 5 out of 6. He had won $199,800. Not a fortune, but to a man drowning in debt, it felt like a miracle. His first call was to Angela. The phone records later showed the call at 9:37 p.m. Marcus could hardly contain himself, telling her they were finally free, that their troubles were over. On the other end of the line, Angela squealed with excitement, insisted he come home as soon as he could so they could plan their future together. Marcus believed every word. For once, he allowed himself to imagine breathing room, maybe fewer shifts on the road, maybe even buying that little house he'd been talking about with his sister Danielle. The next day, Marcus rushed home, clutching the confirmation from the Michigan lottery like it was a golden ticket. Angela greeted him with tears and kisses, playing the part of the supportive wife who couldn't believe their luck. When they drove to Lansing together to claim the prize, Marcus leaned toward caution, but Angela urged him to take the lump sum immediately. "Why wait?" she said. "Why risk the banks, the delays, the red tape?" Marcus relented, and within 2 days, the money was in his account. He paid off 2 credit cards, cleared the car loan, and withdrew about $40,000 in cash, storing it in a metal lockbox in the duplex. He told Angela and his sister Danielle that finally, things were going to change. He was tired of the endless miles on the highway, of living paycheck to paycheck. With this money, they could start fresh, build a more stable life. To Danielle, he sounded hopeful for the first time in years. But in Angela's mind, hope took a different shape. That pile of cash wasn't a lifeline for marriage. It was an exit. She and Victor began whispering in darker tones, trading texts about opportunity, about what Marcus would never share willingly. While Marcus talked of new beginnings with his wife, she was already sketching out a plan to make sure she wouldn't have to share any of it at all. What Marcus Green didn't see, as he smiled at the thought of brighter days ahead, was that the biggest mistake of his life wasn't all the years of hard work, or the debts he carried, or even the lottery ticket he bought at that speedway on Dixie Highway. It was trusting the woman sleeping beside him, and in less than 3 weeks, that mistake would cost him everything. Marcus Green's life had always been predictable. Wake up before dawn, grab a quick cup of coffee, and drive to the long stretches of Michigan highways until the sun dipped again. His bus routes took him across cities like Lansing, Flint, and even down to Chicago. It was grueling work, but it kept a roof over his head and food on the table. To Marcus, routine was stability, and stability was the closest thing he had to happiness. He wasn't a man of extravagance. All he wanted was a home of his own, maybe a chance to slow down, to be present in a marriage that had been fading into habit. Angela Green, however, saw life through a different lens. To her, routine wasn't stability, it was suffocation. She was stylish, polished, the type of woman who kept her hair and nails perfect even on the busiest days at the boutique. On paper, she was successful, a supervisor who knew how to handle demanding customers with a smile. But her paycheck was small, the debts were endless, and at 32, she felt like her life had stalled. Instead of gratitude for Marcus's long hours, she resented the way money still seemed scarce. Instead of seeing his modest dreams as comforting, she saw them as chains tying her to mediocrity. And then there was Victor Hall. He was 36, a security guard at the mall where Angela worked. Divorced, a bit rough around the edges, but with an easy charm that drew people in. His co-workers described him as fun, sociable, always ready to crack a joke or flirt. What they didn't say, but Angela noticed, was how often he complained about being broke, about overdue bills and creditors calling his phone. In Victor, Angela found both a distraction and an escape. Their first conversations were innocent enough. Banter near the store entrance, texts about work. But soon, the messages turned personal, then intimate. By spring of 2018, she was spending 2 or 3 nights a week at his apartment, telling Marcus she was covering late shifts at the boutique. Victor was far from perfect, but he represented something Marcus never could: excitement, rebellion, the chance to rewrite her story. With him, Angela could pretend the bills didn't exist, that she wasn't tied to a husband who measured his worth by overtime miles. Together, they fantasized about starting fresh, moving away, cutting off the lives they felt trapped in. Victor liked to dream big, but without money, it was nothing more than talk. That changed the night Marcus called home from his motel room. $99,800. To Marcus, it was a blessing, a chance to buy freedom from debt, to finally breathe. To Angela, it was fuel to ignite the fantasy she'd been nursing with Victor. For the first time, escape wasn't just talk. It was possible. Angela smiled and clapped her hands when Marcus showed her the lottery email. But in her heart, she was already calculating. $40,000 in cash sat in their home within a locked metal box. Marcus told her he wanted to use it for a down payment on a modest house, to settle down, maybe reduce his time on the road. He even spoke to his sister, Danielle, about how hopeful he felt. But when Angela texted Victor that same week, her words were different. He won't share it. He wants it all for himself. But this is our chance. At first, Victor hesitated. Murder wasn't something you slid into casually. He joked that she should just take the money and run. But Angela pushed harder. She painted Marcus as an obstacle, someone standing in the way of their freedom. She told Victor they deserved the future Marcus would never give her. And slowly he came around. He didn't see it as a killing. He saw it as a solution. Marcus was too trusting, too blind to the betrayal happening right in front of him. By the end of August, the tone of their messages had shifted. Gone were the flirty exchanges and vague daydreams. In their place were detailed instructions, planning, strategy. Angela had already researched sedatives. Zalpedum, strong enough to knock Marcus out cold. Victor agreed to bring his truck when the time was right. Angela even told him which night Marcus would be home after a long weekend route. The fantasy of escape had hardened into something darker, something irreversible. While Marcus spoke of paying debts and buying a house, Angela and Victor whispered about something else entirely: how to get rid of him. Marcus believed the lottery was his second chance at life. But for Angela, it was a second chance without him. Marcus never suspected a thing. To him, August 2018 was a turning point. He finally had enough money to pay down his debts, and he began daydreaming about little things he had long denied himself. A house with a small yard, fewer nights spent in motels, maybe even a short vacation with Angela. He talked to his sister Danielle about slowing down on the road and creating a life with more balance. He thought Angela shared the dream. What he couldn't see was that his wife was already crafting an entirely different plan. Angela's mind moved quickly after the lottery payout. Marcus had deposited the winnings, paid off the cards and the car loan, and withdrawn $40,000 in cash. She watched him separate the bills into envelopes and tuck them neatly into a metal lockbox in their bedroom closet. To Marcus, the money represented stability. To Angela, it was a pile of opportunity waiting to be claimed. The problem, in her eyes, was Marcus himself. He was in the way. The idea of murder didn't arrive all at once. At first, she simply confided in Victor, telling him Marcus was too controlling with the money, too focused on practical plans that left nothing for her. She hinted at how easy it would be to take it and go. But Victor knew running off with stolen cash was sloppy. They'd always be looking over their shoulders. If Marcus was gone, though, if Marcus couldn't file reports, couldn't call the police, couldn't tell his side of the story, then the money would be theirs with no questions asked. That possibility settled like a seed between them, and it began to grow. Angela took the first concrete step. Through a co-worker, she managed to obtain a blister pack of Zalpidem, a powerful sedative available without prescription in Canada. She told the co-worker it was for her insomnia. In reality, she had spent nights on her phone, scrolling through forums and medical pages, noting dosage levels, how long it took to work, how long it would keep someone unconscious. The tab she saved on her browser painted a chilling picture of intent. With the pills in hand, Angela began rehearsing the plan in her mind. Marcus trusted her completely. If she handed him a glass of whiskey after dinner, he'd drink it without a thought. Once he was unconscious, Victor could come to house, and together they could tie Marcus up, wrap him in sheets, and transport him in Victor's Ford F-150. Victor knew the roads well enough to find a dark, secluded spot. There was a bridge that spanned Holloway Reservoir, isolated in the early morning hours. If Marcus went over the rail, sedated and bound, the water would do the rest. In text messages later recovered by investigators, Angela laid out the details with startling precision. Wait 2 blocks over. Don't pull in front of the house. I'll have him ready. Another. He'll never know what hit him. Just be here after midnight. Victor pushed back at times, nervous about how dangerous this was. Angela reassured him. She told him Marcus never questioned her, never suspected anything. She framed the plan as clean, simple, a way to erase the problem standing between them and freedom. At home, Angela's behavior shifted subtly. She acted more affectionate, more attentive, making Marcus believe the lottery money had brought them closer. She poured his drinks with a smile, asking about his day, stroking his arm while he relaxed on the couch. Marcus interpreted it as renewed love. Angela saw it as rehearsing her role. The stage was set in late August. Marcus had finished a weekend route and was scheduled to stay home on Sunday night. Angela made dinner, laughed at his stories, and brought out a glass of whiskey just before bed. Crushed into the amber liquid were several Zalpidem tablets, invisible and tasteless. Marcus sipped, unaware he was swallowing the first step of a carefully rehearsed execution. While he drifted off on the couch in pajama pants and a t-shirt, Angela texted Victor, "It's time. Bring the truck." Her pulse quickened, but she didn't hesitate. She had convinced herself this wasn't betrayal. It was survival, a chance to live the life she deserved. In that small duplex, with the hum of the television in the background, Marcus believed he was safe in the company of the woman he loved. Instead, he was sliding into unconsciousness, never realizing that the lottery, when he celebrated 2 weeks earlier, had signed his death warrant. The night of August 26, 2018, began like so many others for Marcus Green. He had finished a weekend bus route and was grateful to spend the evening at home. Angela prepared dinner, pasta and garlic bread, simple but comforting, and the two of them settled on the couch to watch television. For Marcus, it was one of the rare evenings where work, debt, and travel didn't hang heavy on his shoulders. He was home. He had money tucked away in their closet. And for the first time in years, he believed tomorrow might actually be brighter. By 11 p.m., Marcus had grown drowsy. Angela brought him a glass of whiskey, just like she had planned. Inside the drink, several zalpidem tablets had been crushed and stirred until they dissolved completely. Marcus raised a glass with a tired smile, thanking her without suspicion. Within 30 minutes, his words began to slur, his eyelids heavy. By 11:30, he was sprawled across the couch, breathing slowly, unconscious. Angela's phone buzzed. It was Victor. He was parked a few blocks over in his Ford F-150, waiting for her signal. She typed back quickly. "He's out. Come now." Her hands shook as she pressed send, but she didn't falter. At 12:15 a.m., the rumble of Victor's truck echoed faintly down the street. Angela unlocked the back door, and within moments Victor slipped inside. The house was silent except for the low murmur of the TV. Marcus lay motionless, dressed in a T-shirt and pajama pants. Victor stared at him for a moment, uneasy, then muttered, "You sure about this?" Angela's voice was steady. "It's the only way." Together they worked quickly. Victor pulled plastic zip ties from his pocket, binding Marcus's wrists and ankles. The sound of the ties tightening cut sharply through the quiet house. Angela fetched a bedsheet, and they rolled Marcus's limp body onto it, cocooning him tightly. The man who had spent his life shuttling strangers safely from one city to another was now nothing more than a bundle at the mercy of two people he trusted least. Surveillance cameras from a neighbor's property later captured a shadowy figure, Victor, struggling to carry a large, heavy bundle toward the back of the pickup. The footage was grainy but unmistakable, the outline of a man dragging something too large to be ordinary luggage. He hoisted Marcus into the bed of the truck, slammed the tailgate shut, and climbed behind the wheel. Angela locked the door behind her and slipped into the passenger seat. At 12:30, they pulled away into the night. The drive north toward Holloway Reservoir was dark and quiet. Angela stared out the window, heart pounding but face composed. Victor gripped the wheel tightly, stealing glances at the wrapped figure in the rearview mirror. "He's still breathing," Victor said. Angela's reply was cold. "He won't be for long." At around 3 a.m., they reached Stanley Road Bridge. The reservoir stretched wide and black beneath them, the water rippling faintly in the moonlight. Victor parked the truck and killed the engine. The two sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they were about to do pressing on them. Finally, Angela whispered, "Let's finish this." They pulled Marcus from the bed of the truck. He stirred faintly, groaning to the fog of sedation, but his body was too heavy, too slack, to resist. His wrists and ankles were cinched tight, leaving angry red marks. His head lolled to one side as Victor, and Angela dragged him to the guardrail. The night air was damp and cold, the only sound to shuffle their feet and the lapping water below. With a heave, they lifted Marcus onto the rail. For a split second, his eyes fluttered open, but he was too weak to speak, too drugged to understand. And then, in one motion, they pushed. His body tumbled silently into the darkness before hitting the water with a hollow splash. Ripples spread across the reservoir, then stilled. Angela stood frozen, staring into the black water. Victor muttered a curse, his breathing ragged. They tossed Marcus's phone, wallet, and watch after him, tiny splashes lost in the night. For a moment, the silence was absolute. Then Victor grabbed Angela's arm. "We need to go." By 5 a.m., license plate scanners recorded the Ford F-150 heading southbound on I-75, back toward Detroit. At the duplex, Angela showered, scrubbing the night from her skin. She packed a suitcase with deliberate calm, then sent her landlord a message saying she'd be away for a bit. By mid-afternoon, she was gone. In her version of events, Marcus had left her. He had taken the money, packed a bag, and vanished into the night. She would even cry when she told his sister the story. But the truth, the dark, silent truth, was already sinking beneath the waters of Holloway Reservoir. 2 days passed, and no one had heard from Marcus Green. For a man who called his sister Danielle almost every evening after his routes, the silence was deafening. Danielle knew her brother's patterns better than anyone. He might be exhausted from work. He might be strapped for cash. But Marcus never went this long without at least a text. Something was wrong, and deep down she felt it. On the third day, Angela finally called her. Her voice was shaky, layered with rehearsed sobs. She claimed Marcus had packed a bag, grabbed a lockbox, and walked out without a word. "He's gone, Danielle. He just left me. I think he's seeing someone else," she cried into the phone. To most people, it might have sounded believable, but Danielle knew her brother. Marcus had just told her days before about his hopes to put a down payment on a house, to finally stop living paycheck to paycheck. He was excited, full of plans. There was no way he would throw that away. Danielle pressed Angela for details. What time did he leave? What was he wearing? Had he taken his phone? Angela's answers were scattered, inconsistent. She repeated herself, avoided specifics. Each word only made Danielle more suspicious. By August 29th, Danielle couldn't wait any longer. She drove to Marcus's duplex on Nottingham Road. The neighborhood was quiet, but the windows of her brother's unit were dark. She knocked, then she pounded. For nearly 20 minutes, she called his name at the door, her heart pounding harder with every second. There was no answer. Finally, with dread curling in her stomach, she dialed the Detroit Police Department and requested a welfare check. When officers arrived, they canvassed the street first. One neighbor mentioned seeing a U-Haul van outside the property the day before, but no one had spoken to Marcus. Another said they thought they'd heard movement late at night, but couldn't be sure. With the landlord's permission, police entered the duplex. Inside, everything looked strangely intact. Marcus's work jacket still hung neatly on the coat rack. His bus company uniform was folded in the hamper. A half-packed suitcase sat on the bed, shirts, socks, a toiletry kit tucked inside, as though he'd been planning for a trip but hadn't finished. On the nightstand, officers found his phone, powered off. His wallet and keys, however, were gone. The house wasn't ransacked, no signs of forced entry. But the scene felt staged, unnaturally tidy, almost too calm. The lead officer made notes as Danielle stood in the doorway, eyes welling with tears. "He wouldn't leave like this," she insisted. "Not without telling me. Not after the lottery. He was making plans." She repeated it again and again, until the officers agreed this was more than a simple disappearance. That night, an official missing person report was filed. Detectives interviewed Danielle further, and she shared everything she knew. The lottery win, the conversations about buying a house, Marcus's optimism. He was finally happy, she told them. He finally saw a future. Why would he just walk away? Her conviction left detectives uneasy. They began piecing together the details, and all paths seemed to circle back to Angela. When investigators tried to reach Angela, her phone went straight to voicemail. A second welfare check at the duplex showed it had been vacated entirely. Clothes missing, drawers emptied, her presence wiped clean. Neighbors recalled seeing her carrying suitcases a few days earlier, but no one knew where she'd gone. To Danielle, the picture was clear. Angela was lying. Marcus hadn't abandoned his life. Something terrible had happened, and Angela knew exactly what it was. The detectives took note. In their experience, missing husbands didn't leave behind uniforms folded neatly in the laundry. They didn't forget their phones. And they didn't disappear just weeks after winning nearly $100,000. Everything pointed to foul play, and it was becoming harder to ignore the wife who had vanished right along with the money. Within hours, investigators had already reached out to the Michigan Lottery Commission, hoping to confirm the payout timeline. The money had been real. The win had been real. But now, the man who held the ticket was gone, and the story Angela spun was unraveling faster than she could keep up. 3 days after Marcus Green was last seen, 2 fishermen casting lines along the eastern shoreline of Holloway Reservoir spotted something unusual drifting near the reeds. At first, they thought it was a bundle of trash or a waterlogged tarp. But as the shape drew closer, their stomachs dropped. It was a human body. They scrambled to call the sheriff's office, voices shaking as they reported what they had found. Deputies arrived quickly, sealing off the area with crime scene tape. Under the pale morning light, investigators pulled the body from the water. The man was dressed in pajama pants and a t-shirt, socks still on his feet. His wrists and ankles bore deep red grooves, unmistakable signs of restraint. When detectives checked the body's wallet, they found nothing. Identification would have to wait. But for Danielle Green, who had been praying for a miracle. The phone call that afternoon brought her world crashing down. Dental records confirmed it. The remains belonged to her brother, Marcus. The autopsy painted a grim picture. The medical examiner determined that Marcus had drowned, but not before being rendered helpless. Toxicology tests revealed high levels of zalpidem, a sedative strong enough to incapacitate him completely. The marks on his wrists and ankles matched the pressure of plastic zip ties. Crucially, there were no defensive wounds. Marcus hadn't fought back because he couldn't. He had been drugged, bound, and left to die in the water. The examiner ruled his death a homicide. Back in Detroit, detectives from the Homicide Division joined forces with county investigators. They retraced Marcus's final weeks, focusing on the lottery win. The Michigan Lottery Commission confirmed he had claimed a $99,800 prize just 2 weeks earlier. Surveillance footage from the bank showed Marcus and Angela together as they withdrew nearly $40,000 in cash. Marcus appeared cheerful, Angela smiling at his side. That money, however, was now nowhere to be found. Detectives began piecing together a timeline. Marcus was last known to be alive on the night of August 26. Angela's account that he had packed up and left no longer made sense. He hadn't left of his own free will. He had been silenced. And Angela's sudden disappearance was more than suspicious. It was damning. Investigators canvassed Marcus's neighborhood again. One neighbor recalled seeing a dark-colored Ford F-150 idling on a nearby street in the early morning hours of August 27th. Another mentioned hearing the sound of something heavy being dragged. Still another swore they'd seen Angela loading suitcases into a vehicle days later. Piece by piece, the puzzle was taking shape, and Angela's story unraveled further with every interview. Detectives dug deeper into Angela's personal life. At her workplace, employees at the boutique whispered about how unusually close she had become with a mall security guard named Victor Hall. When pressed, they admitted she often slipped away to see him. Security footage revealed that on the same day she vanished from work, over $7,000 in cash went missing from the store safe. That discovery was critical. Angela hadn't just left Marcus. She had left everything behind, alongside another man. The search now widened to include Victor. Records showed he had not reported for his shifts in several days. His phone, like Angela's, had gone dark. Investigators issued a BOLO alert for his black Ford F-150. Automated license plate readers soon picked up his truck traveling southbound on I-75, crossing into Ohio. He had not returned. Meanwhile, forensic teams scoured the scene at Holloway Reservoir. Along the shoreline, they recovered a single glove snagged on brush. DNA tests later confirmed it belonged to Victor. Back at Marcus's duplex, technicians dusted items for prints. On a bottle recovered from the kitchen trash, they found Angela's fingerprints, traces of the sedative she had ground into her husband's whiskey. The evidence painted a chilling portrait. Angela had drugged Marcus. Victor had helped restrain and transport him, and together they had dumped him into the reservoir to drown. What remained was finding them before they slipped away for good. By the end of the week, the task force had enough to secure arrest warrants. With U.S. Marshals brought in to assist, the net began to tighten. Their movements were being traced through financial transactions, toll crossings, and motel check-ins. Each breadcrumb brought authorities closer to the pair who thought they had escaped. For Danielle, the developments were both devastating and vindicating. She had known her brother would never just leave. He had been hopeful, excited, ready to rebuild his life. Now the truth was clear. The lottery ticket that seemed like salvation had become the motive for his murder, and the woman who should have been his partner in building a future had instead become the architect of his destruction. The case was no longer about a missing man. It was about betrayal, greed, and premeditated murder. And with Angela and Victor now fugitives on the run, investigators knew it was only a matter of time before the chase reached its conclusion. On the morning of September 1st, 2018, just days after Marcus Green's body had been pulled from Holloway Reservoir, a tip finally broke the case wide open. A budget motel outside Dayton, Ohio, reported 2 guests staying under false names, a woman matching Angela Green's description, and a man who drove a black Ford F-150 pickup. U.S. Marshals descended on the location before sunrise. The parking lot was nearly empty, the truck parked crooked at the edge of the property. Inside, room 214 was silent, the curtains drawn tight. When authorities knocked, there was no response. Moments later, they forced the door. Angela was seated on the bed, clutching her phone, eyes wide with panic. Victor Hall stood by the dresser, frozen mid-step. There was no fight, no attempt to run. They surrendered quietly, almost as if they knew the chase was over. Officers searched the room and found nearly $11,000 in cash tucked inside a duffel bag, along with Angela's employment records and, most damning of all, the original Michigan lottery certificate bearing Marcus's name. Within hours, the fugitives were in custody. They were transported back to Michigan under heavy guard, both facing charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and unlawful disposal of a body. But the real battle began inside the interrogation rooms of the Detroit Police Department. Angela was questioned first. She sat across from detectives, tears streaming down her face, clutching tissues as though they might shield her from the gravity of her situation. Her opening story mirrored what she told Danielle. Marcus had walked out, taking the money with him. But when detectives slid photographs across the table, images of Marcus's body, the autopsy results, the toxicology report, her narrative cracked. "I didn't kill him," she insisted. "Victor? Victor planned everything. He told me what to do. I was scared." Detectives leaned in, pressing her on the details. Who bought the sedatives? Whose fingerprints were on the bottle? Whose text described the exact time Victor should arrive? Each piece of evidence pointed straight back at her. Angela sobbed harder, claiming she only wanted to make Marcus sleep so she and Victor could talk to him. The drowning, she alleged, was Victor's idea. But her words sounded hollow against the cold precision of the messages investigators had already pulled from her discarded phone. Meanwhile, Victor Hall chose silence at first. He sat rigid, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the table. When officers reminded him of the DNA evidence, the glove left at the reservoir, he exhaled sharply, breaking his calm. Hours later, in a second session, he spoke. "She told me it was just to scare him," he muttered. "She said he'd never share the money, that he'd ruin her life if she left. She put the stuff in his drink. She tied him up. I thought we were just dumping him somewhere. I didn't know she was going to kill him." But investigators knew better. The text showed Angela instructing him where to park, when to come, even how to carry Marcus out. The plan was joint, deliberate, and detailed. The glove at the water's edge was his. The fingerprints on the sedatives were hers. The surveillance footage showed his truck on I-75, heading south after the body was dumped. Neither could escape the reality. They had worked together to kill a man whose only mistake had been trusting them. As interrogations dragged into night, both Angela and Victor clung to their stories, pointing fingers at one another. Detectives didn't mind. The contradictions only strengthened the case. A prosecutor reviewing the files remarked that it was one of the clearest examples of greed-fueled betrayal he had ever seen. Outside the station, word of the arrest spread quickly. Local media ran headlines. Lottery winner's wife, lover arrested in murder plot. Neighbors shook their heads in disbelief, recalling how Marcus always greeted them kindly, how he talked about finally catching a break. To them, the tragedy was almost unthinkable. His big win had lasted barely 2 weeks before it became his death sentence. Back in her cell that night, Angela curled into herself, replaying the interrogation in her mind. Victor lay awake in his, staring at the ceiling, silently stewing in regret. Both knew the trial ahead would expose every sordid detail of their affair, their betrayal, and their crime. And both knew the weight of the evidence was crushing. The man they thought they had silenced forever, Marcus Green, was speaking louder than ever through every shred of proof left behind. His sedated blood work, his bound wrists, his phone abandoned in the nightstand, his sister's testimony of hope just days before. The story of his murder had already been written, and it was now only a matter of how long his killers would spend behind bars. The trial of Angela Green and Victor Hall opened in Wayne County Circuit Court nearly a year after Marcus Green's body was found drifting in Holloway Reservoir. By then, the case had become one of Detroit's most shocking true crime stories. Headlines blared across Michigan papers. Lottery win turns deadly, and wife and lover accused of killing bus driver for $99,800. The courtroom filled with reporters, Marcus's grieving family, and curious onlookers who wanted to see how greed and betrayal had twisted into murder. Angela was led in first, dressed in a plain navy blouse provided by her attorneys. Her once polished appearance had dulled in custody. She clutched a tissue, eyes red-rimmed, the image of a woman determined to appear broken and remorseful. Victor followed, shackled, broader in frame, his expression tense but defiant. They sat apart, each flanked by separate defense teams, their former alliance dissolved into mutual blame. The prosecution wasted no time establishing motive. Assistant District Attorney Carla Hendrickson laid out the narrative in crisp, devastating strokes. Marcus was a hard-working bus driver who had finally caught a break, winning nearly $100,000 in the lottery. He used the money responsibly, paying debts, clearing loans, and planning a home purchase. But Angela, his wife of 7 years, wasn't satisfied. She had begun an affair with Victor Hall, a mall security guard, and together they conspired to kill Marcus and claim the cash for themselves. The jury sat rapt as Hendrickson described the plan. Angela obtained sedatives, slipped them into Marcus's drink, and when he was unconscious, Victor arrived with zip ties and his truck. They bound Marcus, wrapped him in a sheet, and dumped him off Stanley Road Bridge into the reservoir. He never stood a chance. Then came the evidence. Detectives testified about the welfare check at Marcus's duplex, his uniform folded neatly, his phone hidden in a drawer of the half-packed suitcase. A forensic toxicologist walked the jury through the levels of zalpidem in Marcus's blood, describing how it would have left him utterly defenseless. A DNA analyst presented the glove recovered near the water's edge, bearing Victor's genetic profile. The bottle that once contained the sedatives still bore Angela's fingerprints. Perhaps the most damning piece of all came from the digital forensics team. On a screen at the front of the courtroom, the jury read text after text exchange between Angela and Victor in the days before Marcus's death. He'll be home Sunday. I'll put it in his drink. Wait 2 blocks over. Don't park near the house. The words were like nails in a coffin. Angela herself had scripted the crime. Angela's defense tried to paint her as a victim, a woman manipulated and coerced by her lover. Her attorney argued she feared Victor, that she had been pressured into participating against her will. Angela took the stand, crying as she described feeling trapped, saying she only wanted Marcus to sleep while she confronted him. But under cross-examination, the prosecutor reminded her of the text messages where she gave Victor step-by-step instructions. The tears couldn't erase the cold planning her own words revealed. Victor's defense team attempted a different angle. They portrayed him as a reluctant accomplice who thought they were only going to scare Marcus into handing over money. His lawyer insisted Victor never intended for Marcus to die, that Angela had masterminded the entire scheme. But the prosecution dismantled that narrative by replaying surveillance footage showing Victor's truck near the duplex the night of the murder, and again on I-75 hours later heading south after the body was dumped. Coupled with his glove at the scene, it was impossible for him to pretend he had only played a minor role. For Marcus's family, the trial was brutal. His sister Danielle sat through each day, holding back tears as the details of his final hours were recounted. She had been the first to sense Angela's lies, the first to demand police take his disappearance seriously. Now she sat in the front row, a silent reminder of the man whose life had been stolen by the 2 people seated at the defense tables. After nearly 3 weeks of testimony, closing arguments were delivered. The prosecution's words echoed through the courtroom. This was not an accident. This was not coercion. This was premeditated murder, fueled by greed, carried out by 2 people who valued money more than a man's life. The jury deliberated for just 5 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Angela Green, guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and unlawful disposal of a body. Victor Hall, guilty on all counts as well. Angela sobbed openly, her head dropping onto her attorney's shoulder. Victor stared straight ahead, jaw tight, expression unreadable. At sentencing, the judge delivered the words Marcus's family had waited to hear. Angela Green was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Victor Hall received 40 years, with eligibility for parole after 30. The judge's tone was stern, condemning their betrayal of a man who had trusted them. Marcus Green believed his life was finally turning a corner. The judge said, instead, his wife and her lover turned it into his grave. Marcus's funeral had been held months earlier at Elmwood Cemetery, but the wounds remained raw. At the end of the trial, Danielle stood outside the courthouse, clutching a photocopy of her brother's lottery confirmation. Reporters thrust microphones toward her, asking for comment. Her voice cracked as she spoke. My brother thought he had finally caught a break. He thought he'd finally get a chance at happiness. Instead, the money became the reason he's gone. There's no justice that brings him back, but at least the people who betrayed him will never hurt anyone else. Of the $99,800 prize, investigators later confirmed that about $45,000 had been accounted for, used to pay debts, and recovered in cash. The remainder, nearly half of the winnings, vanished into the hands of Angela and Victor, never to be found. To Marcus's family, it didn't matter. The true loss was something no amount of money could replace. When the gavel fell and the trial ended, the story of Marcus Green was etched into Detroit's memory. Not as a tale of luck or salvation, but as a chilling reminder how greed can turn love into murder, and how a dream of freedom can drown in the very hands that were supposed to hold it safe.